I should have listened to the old-timers at the general store when they warned me not to hunt alone this deep into December. Their rheumy eyes had darkened when I told them my planned route through the northern section of Wharton State Forest. Old Man Henderson had actually grabbed my wrist with his gnarled fingers, his breath reeking of chewing tobacco as he hissed, "Them woods get hungry this time of year, boy." I laughed it off, of course. At 45, I'd spent more than 30 seasons hunting these same woods. I knew every deer trail, every hidden stream, every patch of wild blueberries from Batstow to Atchison. What could these superstitious old coots teach me about the Barrens? But that night, as I packed my gear by the flickering light of my garage workbench, I kept hearing Henderson's warning echo in my head. The wind outside moaned through the pine trees, carrying with it a sound that might have been distant laughter. When I checked the weather forecast on my phone, the screen glitched strangely, showing the temperature as minus 666 degrees Fahrenheit for just a second before correcting itself. The cold bit into my face like a living thing as I stepped out of my truck at the trailhead. My breath plumed in the pre-dawn darkness, and the crunch of frost under my boots seemed unnaturally loud. The usual chorus of morning birds was conspicuously absent. I remember pausing to check my rifle, a trusty Remington 700 that had never failed me. The metal was so cold it burned my fingers. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. My breath wasn't steaming anymore, despite the sub-freezing temperatures. The air around me had gone perfectly still, as if the forest was holding its breath. The hike to my stand took twice as long as usual. The familiar trail markers seemed to have moved overnight, and several times I found myself walking in circles despite using my GPS. When I finally reached my tree, stand near Bear Swamp, the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the pines. For hours, nothing moved in the frozen woods. No squirrels, no birds, not even the usual winter insects. The silence was so complete, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Around noon, I radioed Jim, my voice sounding hollow and alien to my own ears. "Think I'm gonna call it early," I told him, though I hadn't actually decided that until the words left my mouth. That's when I smelled it, that god-awful stench of wet fur and spoiled meat that made my eyes water. The tree stand vibrated slightly, as if something massive had brushed against the trunk. Looking down, I saw them, footprints in the snow that hadn't been there minutes before. Not deer, not bear. These were nearly 2 feet long, with 4 clawed toes and what might have been a thumb. The stride was all wrong, too. Each print spaced nearly 6 feet apart, as if whatever made them could cover ground with impossible speed. When the first branch snapped behind me, I didn't hesitate. I bailed from the stand and ran. My pack snagged on a branch, and I left it, my survival instincts screaming that whatever was behind me didn't care about food or water or first aid kits. The woods changed as I ran. Familiar landmarks vanished. The pines grew taller, their branches intertwining to block out the sky. My breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale hanging frozen in the air before me. That's when I realized the terrible truth. My breath was steaming again because whatever had been holding its breath with me was now exhaling. I could hear it behind me, matching my pace exactly. Not chasing, hurting. Every time I tried to change direction, a branch would crack or a growl would sound from that side. It was funneling me somewhere, and I was too panicked to do anything but run. When I burst into the clearing, my blood turned to ice. The massive black oak stood dead center, its hollow trunk yawning open like a mouth. The snow around it was trampled with hundreds of those same monstrous footprints, all leading in but none coming out. The smell was unbearable now, a mixture of rotting meat, copper, and something sweet like spoiled fruit. My vision swam as I backed away, only to feel something warm and wet drip onto my shoulder from above. Looking up, I saw them. Dozens of frozen faces staring down from the branches. Hunters like me, their features locked in eternal screams, their bodies woven into the tree's limbs like some grotesque fruit. Their eyes followed me as I stumbled backward. That's when the hands grabbed me. Inside, the oak was worse than I could have imagined. The walls pulsed with a sickening warmth, the wood itself seeming to breathe around me. Something crunched underfoot, Bones, I realized as my eyes adjusted. Not animal bones. Human. Some fresh, some ancient. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of my own voice screaming, though my mouth never opened. Then came the cold. Not the clean cold of winter, but a creeping, oily chill that started in my fingers and toes and worked inward. I tried to move, to fight, but my limbs were already locking up, the frost forming intricate patterns across my skin. As the darkness took me, I heard it speak with my own voice. You'll make a fine addition to the collection. They tell me the search party found my body 3 days later, curled inside that hollow oak. The coroner says I died of exposure, but they can't explain why my internal temperature was colder than the surrounding air. They don't talk about how my boots walked away on their own the night after the autopsy. They definitely don't mention the hunters who've gone missing in those same woods every December since. But sometimes when the wind blows just right, you can hear us whispering from the branches. We're always hungry. We're always waiting. And the Pine Barrens have so many hollow trees left to fill. I should have known something was wrong when the elk stopped coming to Devil's Creek. I've been guiding hunters through these mountains for 15 seasons, and that drainage had always been reliable. The salt lick beneath stand number 3 should have been trampled with fresh tracks every morning. But that October, the forest felt wrong, like the animals knew something we didn't. The first rail warning came on October 10th. I was checking trail cams near the creek when I found the blood. Not the bright arterial spray of a successful hunt. This was black and tarry, smeared across the pine needles in wide, dragging streaks. The tracks leading away were all wrong, too deep for their size, with claw marks that curved inward like sickles. I radioed Kyle that night. Something's killing elk down here. I told him, keeping my voice low though I was alone in my tent. And it's not leaving proper carcasses. The static that crackled back sounded like laughter. Dawn broke cold and silent. No chickadees calling, no squirrels rustling in the underbrush, just that heavy, waiting quiet that sets a hunter's teeth on edge. My coffee steamed in the pre-dawn dark, the vapor hanging unnaturally still in the air. The hike to stand number 3 took twice as long as it should have. Familiar landmarks seemed shifted, trees I'd passed 100 times before now leaning at strange angles. My compass needle quivered erratically, spinning lazy circles before settling on a direction that I knew was wrong. When I finally reached the stand, the hair on my neck stood straight up. The ladder rungs were damp with something thick and pungent that smelled like wet copper and spoiled meat. I almost turned back then. Almost. The first hours passed in that eerie silence. No wind, no birds, just the occasional creak of the stand adjusting beneath me. Around noon, I caught movement in the aspens. Not the sideways flicker of an elk, but something low and deliberate moving through the undergrowth. That's when the smell hit me. It was like opening a freezer full of rotten meat. That metallic tang of old blood mixed with something sweet and fungal. My eyes watered as I slowly nocked an arrow, my hands steady from years of training, even as my pulse hammered in my throat. The trail cam mounted below me chose that moment to activate. Its quiet was sounding like a scream in the stillness. When a 6x6 stepped into the clearing, every instinct told me not to shoot. Its coat was patchy with mange, ribs showing through stretched skin. But it was its eyes that froze me, wide and white-rimmed, constantly darting to the brush line behind me. The elk wasn't here to feed. It was being herded. I heard it before I saw it. A wet, clicking sound like knuckles popping in sequence. Then the stand vibrated slightly, just once as if something heavy had brushed against the support post. Looking down nearly stopped my heart. The ground beneath me was moving, not an animal, not a man, just a suggestion of movement where the shadows pooled too thickly between the ferns. My breath came in shallow gasps as I realized what I was seeing. The vegetation wasn't being pushed aside. It was being pressed down from beneath. When I loosed my arrow, the forest swallowed the sound hole. No thud of impact, no cry of pain, just that terrible, endless silence. And the stand lurched violently. I barely had time to register the pain in my ankle before I was falling, the world tilting sideways as something cold and impossibly strong wrapped around my leg. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the trail cam's blinking red light, still recording as I was dragged into the brush. Waking up underground was worse than dying would have been. The air was thick with that same rotten meat stench, so heavy it coated my tongue. My hands scraped against roots and stones as I tried to move, the earth pressing in from all sides. Somewhere in the blackness, I could hear it moving, that same wet clicking sound, now accompanied by a slow, rhythmic scraping. When my fingers found the first bone, I understood. This wasn't a den. It was a larder. I don't know how long I crawled through those tunnels. Hours? Days? Time meant nothing in that endless dark. My elbows and knees were raw from dragging myself through the dirt, my throat torn bloody from screaming into the emptiness. The light, when it came, was blinding. I burst from the hillside like a corpse from a grave, my clothes in tatters, my skin caked with dirt and things I don't let myself remember. The GPS in my pocket had somehow survived, its screen cracked but still glowing with coordinates that placed me 3 miles from stand number 3. They found my bow still in the tree. They found my boot half buried near the creek. They never found the rest of my gear, or the bones I left behind in the dark. Now, I spend my nights watching trail cam footage from across the Uintas, looking for that telltale blur in the underbrush. Because I know it's out there, and I know it's still hungry. Sometimes at night, when the wind blows just right, I can hear it calling from the mountains. Not a howl, not a growl, but a perfect imitation of my own voice, screaming for help in the exact pitch I used that day in the burrow. It's learning, and it remembers its prey. I've spent more nights in these woods than I have in my own bed. 23 years of hunting these ridges, tracking deer through the aspen groves, drinking whiskey around campfires with my little brother Jake. I knew every inch of Blackwater Ridge, or at least I thought I did, until last October, until the day the woods started lying to me. It began with the silence. Real hunters know that sound, the way the forest goes dead, quiet before a storm rolls in. But that morning, the sky was clear, pale blue stretching endlessly over the pines. Yet as I stepped out of my truck at the old logging road, the hair on my neck stood straight up. No birds, no squirrels rustling in the underbrush. Just this waiting stillness, like the whole world was holding its breath. Jake was supposed to meet me at the trailhead by 5:30 a.m. When he didn't show by 6, I figured he'd overslept after another late night at the Buckhorn. Typical Jake. I left a note on his truck windshield and started hiking in alone, my Winchester .308 heavy across my back. The first mile felt normal enough. My boots crunched through the frost, breath steaming in the cold air. But as the sun climbed higher, I noticed strange things. Tracks that didn't make sense, too deep for deer, too narrow for bear. Branches broken at waist height, the splintered wood still oozing sap like they'd been snapped minutes before I arrived. Around noon, I reached the old deer blind we'd built last season. That's when I heard it. "Hey, over here." Jake's voice, clear as day, coming from the dense thicket to my left. I turned, already grinning. "About damn time, you lazy," the words died in my throat. Nothing moved in the brush. No footsteps, no laughter, just that same unnatural silence pressing against my eardrums. I pulled out my radio. "Jake, that you messing around?" Static hissed back. Then, faint but unmistakable, "I'm here. Can't you see me?" It was Jake's voice, but something about the tone made my stomach clench. Too flat, too deliberate, like someone had recorded him and played it back just slightly wrong. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, my rifle now unslung and ready. The undergrowth grew thicker, branches clawing at my jacket. That's when I found his pack. It lay against a mossy log, the main compartment torn open like something had ripped into it with brute force. The straps bore deep gouges, 3 parallel slashes that gleamed wet in the sunlight. His water bottle was still full, his phone dead, but it was the knife that stopped me cold. Jake's hunting knife, the one our dad gave him when he turned 16, was buried to the hilt in a pine tree, 6 feet up the trunk. No one could reach that high without climbing. Help me. This time, the voice came from directly behind me. I whirled, rifle stock pressed tight against my shoulder. Still nothing. Then the bushes 20 yards ahead rustled violently. Not the quick darting of a deer. Something bigger. Something moving with slow, deliberate steps. Branches snapped in a steady rhythm. Left foot, left foot, but the cadence was all wrong. Too much weight on the front. Too much hesitation between steps. I backed away slowly, my boots sinking into something wet. Blood, dark and fresh, pooling between the pine needles. A trail of crimson drops led into a wall of brambles. That's when I heard the breathing. Wet, gurgling, rising and falling in ragged bursts. Not human, not animal either. I ran. Branches whipped in my face as I crashed blindly through the undergrowth. My radio crackled to life again. Jake's voice now distorted with static. "Why'd you leave me?" The search party found Jake's body 3 days later, hanging from an oak tree, 6 feet off the ground. His skin was gray, lips pulled back in a silent scream. But the worst part? The coroner said he'd been dead since the night before I went hunting. Rigor mortis didn't lie. They never could explain the fresh blood at the scene, or why his knife was found 5 miles away, still embedded in that pine tree, or how his voice came through my radio hours after his death. Now I hunt alone, and sometimes when the wind dies and the woods go quiet, I hear it calling from the shadows between the trees. "Hey, over here." Closer every time. Always closer.